My name is Hannah Morris, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs at J Street. And I want to thank you all for joining. This is a particularly difficult day in Israel. As you all likely know, we've seen the return of the Bibas family, their bodies today, as well as another hostage, Oded, and we just want to acknowledge the real pain and suffering that so many in our community are feeling. And it's all magnified as the ceasefire hangs in the balance, and by the tragedies that are happening daily as a result of actions of this administration, which we will be talking about today. We'll try to find glimmers of hope where we can, but I do want to note that this is a really tough time for all of us. And I also want to note that what we're going to be talking about today are the real life impacts of Trump and Musk's decision to take an illegal power grab over USAID to aim and do everything possible to dismantle our aid agency and to halt foreign assistance. We should be very clear about who is feeling the effects of these actions. It is the vulnerable, the suffering around the world who rely on American funding to tackle food insecurity, health crises, and regional conflict. There is absolutely nothing that is America first about this. There's nothing American about this, let alone anything that aligns with our Jewish values. We also just want to note, and Larry, I'm sure will speak to this, what a minuscule part that foreign aid is to the federal budget. And this is upending American safety, security, our interests at home and abroad. And as you all know, this completely undermines congressional authority, which has appropriated funding and authorized and funded USAID as an agency. We'll also talk about how these actions threaten to create more terror and turbulence, empower our adversaries, weaken our influence, and essentially fly in the face of the Constitution and the separation of powers. So lots to discuss, including the on-the-ground impact. And for that, I want to introduce our panelists. First, Larry Garber. He is a former senior official at USAID, including 2 stints as acting assistant administrator of the agency's policy bureau and 5 years as mission director for West Bank, Gaza between 1999 and 2004. He served for 5 years as the head of the New Israel Fund, and he currently serves on the board of Friends of Givat Haviva. For the past year, he has been tracking day after plans for rebuilding Gaza. Larry, thank you for being here. I also happen to go to shul with him, which is fun. I also want to introduce Dr. Yael Braudo-Bahat. She is the co-director of Women Wage Peace, or WWP, where she leads development and advocacy, fosters relationships with organizations and supporters in Israel and abroad, and oversees the movement's communications and messaging. She works closely with Women of the Sun, WWP's Palestinian sister movement, and has played a key role in a joint US-funded project. As co-director of this project, she has worked extensively with USAID to ensure its implementation and success. She says she owes much to her mentor, and this pains me to say, the prominent peace activist and WWP co-founder, Vivian Silver. May her memory be a blessing. So with that, I would like to start off with Larry. Since you have such a longstanding relationship with USAID, can you first talk about your colleagues who are still at USAID, to what extent that looks like, how they are doing, and walk us through the first few days in which Trump and Musk took the sledgehammer to the agency? And then if you can also just go into the 30,000-foot view of what USAID does for people around the world, who benefits from USAID, what kind of projects does it fund, and then we can go further into the regional discussion.
So first of all, thank you, Hannah, for inviting me to join this panel. And this is obviously a very emotional issue for me. As you said, I spent 15 years at USAID working. I met my wife at USAID, and among the people who are still there, she is among them, working in the Middle East Bureau. So just at the personal level, I mean, obviously in my house, but speaking more broadly, um, it's just been horrific. I mean, you know, whatever one can argue about, um, you know, a policy of reviewing USAID and the like, just at the personal level of the people who are dedicated public servants. And, you know, I was a political appointee, both my stints at USAID, but the career staff dedicate their lives, both those who are what we call foreign service officers, those who are civil service officers, those who are foreign service nationals, and to have the type of insulting rhetoric that Trump and Musk used about a criminal organization, radical lunatics. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And to some extent, I must say, even having read Project 2025's chapter on USAID and having raised in my own mind questions about what might happen, this type of frontal assault on USAID was not expected in the way that it's um, come about, both for the legal constitutional reasons that you raised earlier, you know, congressional appropriations and the like, but as well as just the harm that it's doing to our national interests. USAID has been recognized for the last 30, 40 years as a critical element of our national security, together with defense and diplomacy, the 3Ds, as we call it. Um, we refer to it as the soft power, but it works integrally with diplomacy and defense across the globe. Um, the types of programs that we do range from the pure humanitarian assistance coming in after the hurricanes, the tsunamis, the earthquakes, etc., to the types of programs that people are familiar with when they hear the term PEPFAR, where we have basically saved millions of lives over the course of 20 years of people who suffered from or may have contracted HIV/AIDS, to other programs where we're working in the fields of education, agriculture, um, democracy and governance, etc. And again, the way this was done has impacted not just on obviously our staff and our implementing partners, but on the beneficiaries of these programs, again, around the globe. Um, you know, people who count on the life-saving medicines that USAID provides, who count on the food that USAID provides in specific contexts, and a range of other services. And the governments in many of these countries are beginning to feel the hit themselves, because a lot of the programs that USAID does are either done as complements to government programs, or in some places, you know, save the government from having to allocate its budget. So it's been devastating across the board. And on top of that, it has been incredibly poorly implemented. So massive confusion amongst employees at USAID who, you know, like I said, have protocols, have been doing this for a while, total confusion. Even once it was clear, the judge said that they couldn't be be put on administrative leave. They come back, you know, even to move money is stuck. to move undue stop work orders. Guidance is not clear. So it's just been an abomination at so many levels. Um, I could go on, but I'll stop here and talk about some of the West Bank Gaza issues later on.
Yeah, before we hop to Yael, can you paint a little bit of a picture about how this trickles down and affects West Bank, Gaza, and the region, Lebanon, for example? I think that would be helpful. And then Yael can give us an on-the-ground feel.
Sure. So again, West Bank Gaza has been a program that's been in place since 1994, post Oslo. There were precursors to it, but we tend to view that as the real start of a USAID mission in West Bank, Gaza. When I was there in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was one of the largest programs that the US government, assistance programs that the US government was running. Work in many sectors, including health, education. Um, when I was there, certainly we were heavily involved in infrastructure projects, particularly in the water sector and wastewater management. We also supported various Palestinian institutions, helped them develop. Uh, and I just got today, just as an example, a note from a guy now who I consider a colleague. But when I was there, we set up a scholarship program, and he was one of the initial class of scholars. And he wrote, "I was born as one of 9 children in the West Bank with almost no food on our table. The only reason where I am today is because of the dedicated people at USAID who invested in me, whether as a small business owner in Ramallah, a graduate student on a USAID funded scholarship, or the CEO of a consulting firm in Washington, D.C." So this is, the type of, investments that we're making over, 30 years now. In terms of the current program, it was suspended, as many people know, during the first Trump administration. A lot of the staff who had been working there for 20 years were assigned to other country programs in the region and elsewhere. When President Biden came in, the program was revived. The staff was recouped in a sense, and had been operating again at pretty substantial levels, both doing the type of development work in the West Bank, and certainly since October 2023, through the Humanitarian Affairs Bureau, doing a lot of the humanitarian programs in Gaza. Two other points. You mentioned Lebanon, Syria. USAID also has programs there, which are particularly important given recent events in both those countries. So Lebanon has just gone through a transition with a new president, new prime minister. USAID has been there for a long time, but it's been hindered in what it's been able to do because of the political situation there. So there are real opportunities there. And again, I don't need to say there are opportunities in Syria, but just to again highlight the national security implications of what's happened, USAID has supported a NGO that has provided the basic necessities to keep these camps where the former ISIS families are located. Um, and they basically, for a few days, were prevented from providing any food by the stop work order. So, dramatic impact. They have to start up. It's not easy working with local staff and the like. The second point that I'll make is specifically just to show how crazy this all is. Um, the one program that everyone thought was a major success, not a USAID program, I'll say, but an assistance program, was support to the Palestinian Authority security forces. which works, provided training by the U.S. Government through the military, has been going on for 20 years. Um, Again, has trained up uh, a cohort of professional Palestinian police and security forces. And this week we read that they're cutting off assistance to that program too. So, it's hard to know what's the logic behind any of this. But just to say it's detrimental. Personally, it's detrimental to the values that certainly I joined USAID to um, you know be part of, and it's harming our national interest.
Thanks, Larry. And just a reminder, people who are watching, you are welcome to start posting your questions in the chat or the Q&A box. And to your point, Larry, it is important to make clear that we're not just talking about USAID foreign assistance, which tends to be on the development humanitarian side, but also other kinds of foreign assistance. The only exemptions from the get-go were for foreign military assistance to Israel and Egypt, and there have had to be
And emergency food.
an emergency food, and there have had to be waivers given, which have barely worked in most cases. So definitely a problem as we're seeing throughout the region. I'd love to turn to you, Yael, to talk about how the halting of foreign assistance and the dismantling of USAID is affecting women wage benefits from the Nita M. Lowy Middle East Partnership for Peace program, which funds Israeli and Palestinian coexistence groups. How reliant is Women Wage Peace on U.S. funding, as well as your Palestinian sister organization, Women in the Sun? What's happening now on the ground for you?
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to just briefly introduce Women Wage Peace and Women with the Sun in one sentence. We're two grassroots movements working. We're two separate movements. Women Wage Peace is an Israeli grassroots movement working in Israel for 10.5 years now. And for the past 3.5, 4 years, we've been working very closely with the newly founded Palestinian grassroots movement, Women of the Sun. And of course, I can talk a lot about what we're doing on the ground all the time, but I also want to acknowledge that I'm here representing not only Women Wage Peace and Women with Sun, but also the entire Israeli peace camp. Because on the ground currently, during the war and before the war, so many organizations and thousands and tens of thousands of activists are working daily to bring the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to a peaceful resolution to the conflict. This dismantling of USAID really affects all of us. So I'm here representing really the many other organizations as well, many peace activists. We our I would say that our project, our funding from USAID is relatively small. It's a small project, but for us as a two small grassroots movement, I mean, we're very big, but we're a low budgeted grassroots movement. So it was huge. We actually signed the agreement with USAID on September 27th, 2023, just 10 days before October 7th. Holding or we were, after a long process of working with USAID, finally got the approval to implement a project that we call it Women Building Bridges, and really to create bridges between Israel and Palestinian women, to as one of the coordinators said just this morning, it's not about a program, it's about building a community. And this is what we've been doing. It took us a few weeks to understand what we need after October 7th, what we need to change, because we really didn't even begin to implement the project when the war began. And we made some modifications, but we launched the project on time. And imagine that during this very, very hard year, women from both sides, Israeli and Palestinian women, worked together, met together, whether on Zoom if the checkpoints were closed, or in person. We did make many efforts to meet in person in Bejala, in Area C, where we can both organizations, both participants from Israel and from the West Bank could they arrive without permits. And the women, the participants also planned together and they implemented small projects for their communities. And for us, this was a huge step in our partnership, a huge step we take. We always say that we take so much inspiration from the Northern Ireland case, where women organizations, movements worked for 2 decades on the ground to create those bridges between the communities. The Good Friday Agreement will mark its 27th anniversary in 2 months. So we really take inspiration from this case, and this is what we wanted to do on the ground, and we managed to do it during the war. 3 weeks ago, or almost 4 weeks ago, we suddenly got this stop work order. It's not the end of the project. We didn't complete it yet, but although it was towards the end of the project, we still had so much work to do on the ground. There is one component that we cannot implement now. The other component of the women who were building bridges throughout this year, planning the initiatives together, we couldn't just let them down. We couldn't just say, okay, Trump told us to stop, so we'll stop. So we decided, after much consideration, to go through with 4 additional meetings, knowing that we may not receive funding for this. We may need to incur this expense from our out of pocket. And again, we're low budgeted movements. But for us, the participants were the first priority and still are the first priority. I can share you. I mean, as you said, and I absolutely agree. This day has been really, it is a devastating day in Israel. And today we did meet in Bejala, one of the groups together to conclude the process, because we couldn't just leave them hanging loose. And I want really to quote just a few of the participants, what they said about the program. So one of the Palestinian participants, and just to give the sense of how these programs, what impact they have. One of the Palestinian participants told us that before this program, she only knew Israelis, only soldiers, and she knew only guns and shootings in their streets. She lives in a refugee camp near Hebron. And when we met the Israelis in this program, we saw faces, we saw smiles. We also learned that the Jewish or the Israeli community is also humane. We also saw that the Israelis suffer. They also have, it's very difficult time for them as well. It's not only for us. So this is one kind of impact of this kind of project. One of the Israeli participants told the Palestinian participants, I get so much strength from you, because I know how difficult it is for you to arrive to those meetings, and you come, and this gives me strength to go on. Another Israeli participant said that the monthly meetings with the Palestinian participants gave her it was like a shot of hope, a monthly shot of hope. And without those meetings, she couldn't handle and survive this difficult, devastating time that we're experiencing in our region. And just one last quote from one of the Palestinian participants who lost her brother and his entire family in Gaza at the beginning of the war. And she came to all of the meetings. And then she said, I'm taking from here the love and the hope, and it gives me light in such hard times. So this is the kind, and again, we're not the only ones doing this very significant, very important work on the ground. We were able to do it thanks to the MEPA, the Netanyahu Act, and we were thrilled when it was enacted, because we say finally this region also receives the funding that we need because just to compare, and I mentioned the Northern Ireland case before, so just a quick comparison, $42 were invested per year per capita in Northern to resolve the Northern Ireland conflict before the Good Friday Agreement, while here in our region it's $6 per year per capita. This is the investment in peace after the act. 30% substantial encounters with the other side in Northern Ireland versus 4% here. So we really need the funding, this kind of funding. And we know that Olmec, the Alliance for Peace in the Middle East, is advocating for other countries to join forces and just join forces and fund such activities. We can also talk about the implications of the NGO laws on NGOs bill, but we'll do it later. But for us on the ground, it's crucial. Without it, we cannot build the popular support in Israel and in Palestine to promote peace, and we really need it.
Thank you. So I want to get to a couple of questions that I have, and then to the questions coming in from the audience. So first, Yael, do you have a sense from other peace building groups how this is affecting their critical support? Like, where are they going to EU countries, other international organizations, or big funders in the United States to offset this? And then I also want to make sure people are aware that just yesterday, the Israeli coalition government passed a bill through the preliminary discussion reading that would tax donations from foreign governments to NGOs at 80%. And I just want to understand from your standpoint too, what would that mean for you and those in your field, your fellow coexistence groups, especially if you're trying to offset this sharp halting of funding? Do you see this all as related?
On the one hand, it's not related. I will get to the NGOs law in a bit, but yes, the entire Israeli peace camp, most of the organizations do get funding from other countries and from USAID. And when 4 weeks ago this order was issued, it caught us really by surprise. We really don't know what to do now, so we're looking for alternative funding. First of all, to complete our program. Again, we don't want to leave our participants hanging. We have obligations, we have commitments to employees, to contractors, and we don't know how to proceed with this. So we need more funding, either private funding or from other countries. So this is one thing, and again, it affects all of the Israeli peace camp, or most of it. And as for the again, the current, I would say, how do you say makkah, like the 10 in the Bible on Egypt, like the 10 Eser Havakot. So another
Plagues.
Yeah, thank you. So we're still figuring out how to manage this whole USAID crisis, and then now we're facing another crisis, and this act, and I don't know if it is related to what happened in the US and with USAID, but I suspect that it gave the Israeli government the backwind that it needed to, okay, so we can do that as well. And so it's related and not related at the same time, but it's definitely devastating for our camp, for the Israeli civil society, the liberal civil society, because this law, if enacted, will apply only on NGOs that are not supported by the government. They not get the Israeli government funds. So for example, the extreme right organizations do get funding from the government, so they can also get funding from other entities, from other governmental entities in the world. So it's definitely aimed towards the liberal NGOs, the civil society in Israel, to shut it down. It's an extremely anti-democratic law. It will also disable organizations receiving funding from abroad, from governmental entities, foreign governmental entities, to approach courts in Israel, which is again highly anti-democratic act. I can say this. 2 years ago, at the beginning of the current administration in Israel, this bill was on the table as well. And 2 years ago, the US and 10 other European countries objected, and the bill was just removed before it even proceeded. Now, I don't know if the US administration will oppose this law. I'm being very cautious here when I'm speaking. And so we need, first of all, we need other countries, European countries, to object it, to raise their voices against this law. And we need we need the J Street people and the liberal Americans to go to your representatives in the Congress and ask them, in the Capitol, and ask them to object, and ask them to raise your voices against this law, because it will kill the liberal camp in Israel, not only the peace camp, but the entire liberal camp. It's very dangerous, and it's really frightening.
Well, we need them to raise their voices about a lot of things. So add that to number 95. I want to get back to you, Larry, to talk a little bit more in depth about, in your time as USAID administrator, what were some of the successes that you had? And can you speak a little bit more about West Bank water supply and wastewater management? I think that's really interesting to folks here. And anything you can also speak to about historic USAID collaboration with UNRWA.
Okay. So first, just a quick point on what Yael was talking about. I mean, this effort in Israel, straight out of the authoritarian playbook. USAID has seen these laws in other countries that are trying to, eliminate independent NGOs, independent media. And it's very sad to see this moving forward in Israel. In terms of, I like to describe my time as the mission director in USAID as the best of times and the worst of times. I got there in 1999, which was sort of the high point, for those who remember, of the Oslo period. And then 2 years into my tenure there, the second Intifada broke out, and we had to totally reshape our program in response to the developments. In terms of where we were and what the successes were, and this sort of dated back to the immediate post-Oslo period and continued through my time, the most significant investment, certainly by amounts of money, was in the water and wastewater sectors. We built, literally constructed, had engineering firms that were responsible for this, deep water wells in the West Bank that were able to provide a significant amount of fresh water to the Palestinian population there. Again, this was sort of part of the negotiations post-Oslo, and we were definitely a big part of implementing it, and it was a tremendous success. We also constructed a number of wastewater treatment plants. Again, these were efforts that, although they were directly benefiting the Palestinian population, were also of considerable interest to Israel in terms of preventing, in the case of wastewater, runoff going, one was a big one in Hebron, so wastewater going down into the Negev, into Beersheba and the like. So the Israeli authorities who we dealt with were very supportive of these activities. We had constructive relations with them throughout my tenure, even during the second Intifada, because they saw the work that USAID and other donors were doing is being critical to addressing humanitarian and other needs of the Palestinian population, which if we didn't provide, would then the responsibility would fall on Israel, or alternatively, it would just create even more unrest within both West Bank and Gaza, and potentially within Israel itself. So those were the water projects, but we also worked in other sectors, helping establish some of the critical institutional components of the Palestinian Authority and related agencies. So we worked very hard on creating an investment agency, an industrial estate agency, supporting the creation of an independent election commission, which to this day is probably the best election commission in terms of professionalism and the like in the Middle East. So those were major successes. One other point I'll make on this: we started when I was there, and then it grew tremendously during the next 10 years, actually providing support to the Palestinian Authority with direct budget support. It was kind of controversial. We had lots of checks and balances on it to make sure that there was no seepage. Most of the money that we provided from to the Palestinian Authority actually went to pay bills that the Palestinian Authority owed to the Israeli Electric Company and others. So it was a very, again, mutually beneficial arrangement, but helped the Palestinian Authority as taking that amount off of their budget requirements. In terms of UNRWA, again, an interesting dynamic. The US government supports UNRWA, or supported UNRWA until recently, with a fairly large percentage of UNRWA's overall budget. That was cut again during Trump 1, revived in Biden, and then cut during Biden administration again. But that was the historic relationship. We were probably the largest donor to UNRWA. USAID, because UNRWA was so large, UNRWA had its own relationships with the Israeli government, with the Israeli military, and really was not part of the core donor community that existed, that met regularly, that engaged in coordination and dialogue, and tried to facilitate entry and the like to Gaza and the West Bank when there were problems with that, whereas UNRWA did it on its own. And so, but it was a critical part. I mean, we all knew how significant it was in terms of addressing basic services in the West Bank, and particularly in Gaza. So it's been there and recognized as such. I mean, I think as I look in retrospect, this is me speaking personally, we probably should have been addressing some of the issues around where does UNRWA go in the future earlier, as part of a conversation. Now it's coming up in a way that, I think certainly from the US perspective, I cannot see the US resuming support for UNRWA. I think the Israeli government is now taking steps to try and eliminate UNRWA activities in Jerusalem and in the West Bank and in Gaza. UNRWA is resisting. Again, I think the tension is how much Israel actually realizes UNRWA is needed versus sort of this animosity highlighted by the allegations regarding various UNRWA employees being not only maybe affiliated with Hamas, but actually be involved in the October 7th attacks. And, UNRWA, whatever it's trying to do, I don't think is going to succeed in convincing the Israeli public or the US Congress that it deserves funds from the United States.
Thank you. I want to get to you talked about the triple Ds, Larry, and one of the values of American humanitarian assistance, development aid is in countering our adversaries. And we have all heard of China's Belt and Road Initiative as being very influential and impactful, especially in Africa. We know that dismantling USAID and halting our own assistance weakens our soft power. Do you foresee China stepping in at all in this region? And Yael, I'm curious if you've ever seen any attempts at influence here to fill in gaps. We'll start there, and I'll go with one more question to consider. If you can speak, I think this will be primarily you, Larry, to how USAID provides support to entities, political parties, organizations that support democratic reforms abroad. You mentioned the Independent Election Commission, but I think there's part of this whole effort is dismantling liberal democracy. What historically has USAID done to build democratic states and civil society?
So first on China, clearly this is a gift to China. It's certainly already filling gaps in certain parts of the globe where USAID is, seen as pulling out, unreliable, and the like. And that, I assume will continue. The Chinese will have to make their own decision about, how much money they want to put in to fill these gaps. But clearly, whereas the U.S. used to be seen as the, most reliable donor in terms of consistency of having a presence on the ground and the like, this may all disappear. And guess who's still going to be there? China and its representatives, whether they're state-owned companies or whether they're so-called diplomats, but they will be the people on the ground, and we will not. I'm not certainly in West Bank, Gaza. I never confronted the Chinese as an actor. Maybe that's changed. They were certainly not part of our conversations as donors. I do think there may be more opportunities for them potentially if they wanted in a place like Syria, but I think it's still too early to tell, and things are unfolding. And if I were advising them, there are probably better opportunities for them to fill gaps than in the very unsettled situation in Syria. They haven't called me up asked me for advice yet, but in terms of the other point about what USAID does in the democracy sector, supporting political parties and like, some may know, others may not. I came to USAID in 1993 from the National Democratic Institute, where I'd worked for many years, working on elections and other democratic processes. And part of the reason I came to AID was my boss at NDI was made the head of USAID, and he wanted to integrate democracy, rights, and governance programs into the mainstream of USAID. And so that was our challenge at the time. And we succeeded, and the program grew dramatically over the past 2 decades with considerable bipartisan support. I mean, this wasn't a political issue. And I think, certainly I've been surprised at how polemical the extreme right has been against these particular programs. The board of IRI at its last annual dinner, the International Republican Institute, which is the counterpart to the Democratic Institute, had as its keynote speaker a guy named Marco Rubio, talking about the wonderful work that IRI did around the globe. So this was a real effort. Now, there were certain guidelines that were part of it. We did not, support parties in elections. We did provide institutional support to political party development or funded organizations to do that. And it was, sort of a tough line that we sometimes walked in particular context of, when we would, not provide assistance to a political party because it was getting too close to an election, and it would be seen as being partisan and the like. But for most cases, we stuck away, did not get involved in that, with one big exception that I was concerned about at the time, which was in the 2006 election in West Bank, Gaza, where Hamas was running, and there was support provided through U.S. government efforts to Fatah in various ways. There was an article in the Washington Post that came out about 5 days before the election, which in my mind probably added to Hamas's vote totals because it was seen as U.S. interference. So I think the better policy, and mostly adhered to, has been not to get involved directly in elections, but to support institutions like an election commission, institutions like civil society organizations that monitor elections, support programs that provide leadership training for people who may want to go into political efforts. A lot of effort try to get women involved in politics, but to stay away from partisan political work.
Yeah, Elle, thank you, Larry. I want, first, if there is anything to say on the Chinese question, please feel free to jump in.
Not that I know of. So
not there yet. Okay, great. Can you speak, what would you urge listeners here to say to their members of Congress about this funding? And also, I would love to hear from you. I mean, all of us understand that this kind of funding is in the US's national security interests. But how do you think we all should be framing that to those beyond members of Congress, to American civil society, our cousins, uncles, aunts who might not align with us all the time?
So I would just say before that, it's a great question. We again, China, we don't know yet, or I don't know if it's happening or not, but we're not aware of it. But we are approached by other countries, by other embassies. But they also now take a step back, because everyone knows, and this is relating to your question, that everyone knows that for Israel to exist, and to be sustainable and to have a sustainable future, Israel needs peace, because we cannot go on living on the sword, but as we say, we cannot go on fighting. This is why Women Wage Peace was established, to protect the state of Israel, to end the war, to end the conflict, and provide the freedom and security for both nations, because our freedom, the freedom of Israel is interconnected and intertwined with the Palestinians' freedom. So for this, we need peace, and now and other countries know that as well. But now everyone takes a step back because of of this potential law. We now need to seek more private funding, which is much more scarce, and it doesn't get to the extent of the sums of USAID and the MEPA and the EU funding and so forth. And the last thing we need now on the ground in our region is a more fierce competition between the NGOs. We need to work together. We need to collaborate. We cannot become enemies and fight for scarce resources. We won't survive. And Israel won't survive without civil society. Israel would want survive without peace. So this is, I think this maybe gives a reply to both questions. But as for what can be done, yes, first of all, make anything you can to this dismantling of USAID and the breach of contract of USAID with with us, with everyone, with all the organizations depending on it. And again, we signed contracts based on this contract. We signed contracts with others. We hired employees, and we need to pay them. We're obligated. We cannot say, okay, we won't pay you. And just again, personally, I had to face our contractors, which are amazing, and they're doing it with so much love and care. And I had to fight with them and explain that I need to postpone payment, or maybe I won't be able to pay. And this is because of two men in DC, just doing this, and everything goes hell breaks loose. So we need to maintain the connections here on the ground with our contractors, with other organizations. So we need you to tackle the for example, the legal aspects of this. And I know it can take years, and I know it's not simple. And I also know that courts might eventually rule that this was legal, this was constitutional, and it's okay. And I hope it doesn't come to this, but this is one aspect. But then yes, ask them to pressure to do whatever they can to undo this dismantling of USAID and bring back the funding that we all need. This is oxygen for us. And again, private funding, I know, again, it's scarce. I know that the current US financial status is on, it's is unpredictable. And I was just 2 weeks ago in the US with my a colleague from Women of the Sun, Rim. We were talking to Americans. We were invited to speak at Princeton University, and I saw in the eyes of the Americans the same look that I saw in Israeli eyes 2 years ago, when the protests began in Kaplan Street and with this current administration. So I know it's unpredictable and unstable also in the US, but we need you both to lobby and talk to your representative in the Capitol Hill, and also help us in the meantime find the funding that we need to survive, because many organizations might shut down because of this.
Can I make a couple of points just to follow on what Yael just said?
Yeah, I was going to urge this. We'll close actually with this in terms of what we can be doing. Any hope that you see, Larry? And I do want to just make sure everyone knows we will be lobbying on this ourselves.
So first of all, and I saw some of the questions in the Q&A. So there's sort of, I think, a multi-tiered process going on. There is the litigation in the courts, both, to challenge sort of the general freeze, the general shutdown of USAID, but also in a more obvious sense to address the, contractual issues that USAID is violating day in and day out now, of leaving organizations that we had committed money to, which have outstanding debts, not being able to pay them. And as Yael says, it goes down a couple of layers. So it's the suppliers and others. And this is true not just in Israel, obviously, this is true across the board. So litigation is going on. It is slow, and it may get some relief, particularly on the contractual stuff. I think the broader issues are going to be tougher. The next obvious avenue is through Congress. And again, Yael highlighted it. The big deadline coming up is March 15th or thereabouts, when the government runs out of money anyway. And so there needs to be a new budget, or not a new budget, but to fund the government for the rest of this year through September 30th. And that's going to be the opportunity of the administration to cut off, whether it's USAID or other government agencies, or reduce them significantly so that they can close them out. And so Congress is going to have an opportunity and will need to step in at that point. Here, I'll make a point that Yael made about Israel that also is needed here. We need to find coalitions to support efforts like USAID and the programs that USAID does in West Bank, Gaza, but in Israel and elsewhere. And those coalitions need to be much broader based than perhaps we've had in the past. Someone had asked about AIPAC. When I went to West Bank, Gaza, the first meeting I had, J Street was not around at the time, so I didn't have to, choose one or the other. But one of the first meetings I had was with representatives of AIPAC to make sure that they were going to be supportive of the US government's efforts to assist the Palestinians. And they were, and that was a big help. And I think that that needs to be the type of effort that goes on. AIPAC has obviously changed in the last 20 years, so it may be much more difficult, but we need to have a broad coalition going to Congress, recognizing that this is a disaster for the United States, and it's a disaster for Israel's future prospects in the region. After that, there are going to be other conversations that go on where we're going to need to be telling the story about, what we're losing to China, to Russia, to others. And again, we're going to need to, find both, broad coalitions, but also, good stories to share with people about the losses that will result from this effort. So it's a major challenge. It's not going to be easy, and at some point, I pray we will be able to start thinking about what a new infrastructure will be for the U.S. government to be able to support these type of programs around the globe.
Larry, Yael, thank you so much for taking the time today. I do want to reassure and invite those of you on the call to continue and get more involved with J Street at this time, because we are going to be a leading Jewish organization who will be advocating for restoration of USAID, for resuming foreign aid, increasing foreign aid. And as part of that, and as you think about your own power as American Jews, as J Street supporters, I encourage you all to not just call Democratic members of Congress, but if you happen to be in a Republican district or state, they should be hearing this too and feeling that pressure. And I also encourage you all, if you are involved in synagogues, in JCRCs, in federations, other Jewish establishment legacy organizations, they should be leading on this as well. Some of them are, and understand that. And I think that that is a real opportunity for broader unity in the American Jewish community, because it's not just in America's interests, it's also in Israel's interests that that we continue leading in foreign assistance around the world. So I will leave it at that, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.